All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of causality.
Oh, causality.
Specifically, a new technique called SERD.
SERD.
That's a short for Synergistic, Unique, Redundant Decomposition of Causality.
Okay.
Think of it as a powerful new tool for researchers like you who are working with complex systems.
Right.
Especially in the field of natural computing.
Yeah. It's fascinating, really.
So you've got excerpts from a dense academic paper,
Yes.
appropriately titled Decomposing Causality, from Major Communications.
Okay.
Some supporting material from MIT News.
Yes.
And even a GitHub repo.
Wow. A GitHub repo.
We know you're busy, so we've distilled the key takeaways to help you decide if SERD is something you should be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And maybe even
considering for a white paper.
considering for a white paper.
Indeed. Now, before we get into the details of SERD, let's take a step back and revisit a fundamental question.
Okay.
What is causality, really?
Right. It's more than just correlation.
It's more nuanced than just observing that two things happen together and assuming one causes the other.
The paper gives a great example: deforestation and respiratory illness.
Oh, interesting.
They often occur in the same regions. But can we definitively say that deforestation directly causes respiratory problems?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
There could be other factors at play.
Right.
What we call confounding variables.
Confounding variables.
For instance, air pollution is linked to both deforestation and respiratory issues. This is where traditional methods often stumble.
Like Granger causality.
Yes.
Or transfer entropy, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. They can be helpful.
Yeah.
But they often hit a wall.
They do.
When dealing with these complex real-world scenarios.
Exactly, especially when the relationships are nonlinear or there are hidden variables that we haven't even considered, let alone measured.
Okay.
SERD takes a different approach by focusing on information flow.
Information flow.
It's a pretty elegant concept, actually.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Interesting.
Imagine that variables are sending messages to each other.
Messages.
The stronger the message flow,
the
more likely there's a causal influence between them.
And SERD cleverly quantifies this information flow.
Yes.
Providing a sort of causality map that breaks down the influence into three distinct types. Unique, synergistic, and redundant. This is a key advantage for researchers, especially in a field like natural computing, because it moves beyond simply saying A causes B.
It gets much more specific.
Right.
Providing a finer-grained understanding of the causal relationships at play.
Exactly.
So let's break down these three types.
Okay.
What does it mean for a causal influence to be unique?
Unique causality means that variable A alone impacts variable B. Alone.
Think of the relationship between education level and income.
Education level and income. Generally speaking, a higher level of education leads to a higher income potential.
Okay.
Of course, there are other factors involved.
Sure.
But education has a unique causal influence.
That makes sense. Now, what about synergistic causality?
Synergistic causality means that A and B together are necessary to impact C.
Together?
This is often seen in medicine where certain drug combinations are effective together, but not individually.
Ah, like the classic example of penicillin and streptomycin.
Yes.
Where each antibiotic alone is only partially effective against certain bacteria.
Right.
But together they become much more potent.
Precisely. And finally, we have redundant causality.
Redundant?
Where either A or B can impact C equally.
Like a student's work ethic or the amount of sleep they get?
Yeah.
Both can independently impact their grades.
Exactly. Now imagine applying these types of causality to the world of natural computing.
Okay.
Let's say you're working with a genetic algorithm. You have multiple parameters influencing the algorithm's performance. SRD could help you disentangle whether certain parameters have unique effects, worked synergistically, or are potentially redundant.
That would be a game changer, right?
Absolutely. But hold on.
Okay.
There's another layer to this.
Another layer?
SRD goes even further by acknowledging that we don't always have the full picture.
Don't have the full picture.
What if there are hidden variables that we haven't even measured?
Okay, so we're talking about factors that are lurking beneath the surface, potentially skewing our results.
Right.
How does SRE deal with that?
This is where the concept of the leak comes in.
The leak.
SRD can actually estimate how much causality is hidden because we haven't measured all the relevant variables.
That's mind-blowing.
It is.
It's like SRD is telling us, hey, there's more going on here than you realize.
Right.
So even if we don't know what those hidden variables are, we at least have a sense of how much they might be influencing our system.
Precisely. It's a call for humility. Reminding us that our observations are always incomplete. Right. And it's particularly relevant in fields like natural computing, where the systems we're dealing with are inherently complex and often involve a high degree of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's part one.
Welcome
back. I hope you're ready to dig a little deeper into the inner workings of SRR.
Exactly. Understanding the nuts and bolts is crucial for evaluating the strengths and limitations of any new method.
Yes.
Especially for considering using it in our own research.
Right.
Or even as the basis for a white paper.
Now, the paper gets pretty technical. Diving deep into the mathematical underpinnings.
Yeah.
But we'll distill the key concepts.
Okay.
So you can grasp the essence of what's happening under the hood.
That's what we like to hear.
At its core, SRR leverages something called specific mutual information.
Specific mutual information.
You can think of it as a way to measure how much information about a particular outcome
of a variable is contained within another variable.
Okay, let's break that down with an example.
Okay.
Imagine we're looking at a variable called, say, algorithm performance. And we want to understand how much information about a specific outcome.
Yeah.
Let's say achieving a 90% success rate.
90%?
It's contained within another variable, like the mutation rate in our algorithm.
That's a perfect example.
Okay.
Specific mutual information would tell us how much knowing the mutation rate helps us predict the likelihood of achieving that 90% success rate.
Okay.
But SRD takes it a step further.
How so?
It breaks down that specific mutual information into those three types of causality we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Redundant, unique, and synergistic.
So it's not just about the total amount of information shared,
right,
but about the specific types of information being exchanged between those variables. That's pretty neat.
It is, and that's what allows SRD to distinguish between those subtle causal relationships that other methods often miss. It's like having a high-resolution lens that can zoom in on the intricate details of causal interactions.
The paper mentions a lot of benchmark cases. They
Right.
really put SRD through its paces, didn't they?
They did, and that rigorous testing is vital for establishing the robustness and versatility of any new method. They applied SRD to a wide range of scenarios, from systems with just a handful of variables to complex systems involving synchronization phenomena and even logic gates.
Speaking of logic gates,
Yes,
that has interesting implications for natural computing, right?
it does.
They're fundamental building blocks in computer science. And understanding the causal relationships within them could have a significant impact on areas like artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Absolutely. They could even lead to new insights into how we design and optimize these complex systems.
Okay.
Now let's delve into a couple of those benchmark cases that are particularly relevant to this audience.
Okay.
One that stood out to me was the Lotka-Volterra model.
Lotka-Volterra
A classic ecological model.
Ah, yes, the one that describes the predator-prey dynamics.
Yes.
With populations oscillating over time. I vaguely remember that from my ecology classes.
Right.
Did SRD handle it well?
It did, even when they introduced noise into the system.
Noise.
Which, let's face, is always present in real-world data.
Yeah.
SRD accurately identified the causal relationships between the predator and prey populations.
That's impressive.
It is.
It suggests that SRD is robust enough to handle the messiness of real-world data, which is a crucial consideration for researchers.
Precisely. Now, another case relevant to natural computing is the three interacting species system.
So instead of just a predator and prey, we now have three species in a complex web of interactions.
Exactly.
It sounds a lot like the kinds of dynamics you see in genetic algorithms.
Right.
Or swarm intelligence.
You're right on the mark. It's a step closer to the complexity we encounter in natural computing. And again, SRD performed exceptionally well, accurately identifying the causal links between the species, even distinguishing between direct and indirect influences.
So it could tell if one species was directly influencing another?
Yes.
Or if the impact was mediated through a third species?
Exactly.
That level of granularity is pretty powerful.
It is, especially when you're trying to untangle complex networks. And remember, this applies not only to ecological systems, but also to social networks, genetic interactions, and of course the intricate workings of algorithms in natural computing.
It seems like SRD is showing a lot of promise.
It is.
But what about real-world data beyond these benchmark cases?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, they applied SRD to 2 real-world data sets.
2.
The turbulent energy cascade and the turbulent boundary layer.
Oh, okay.
Let's focus on the turbulent energy cascade first.
Okay, the energy cascade, that's where the analogy to natural computing gets really interesting.
Yes.
It describes how energy flows from large to small scales in a turbulent flow.
Right.
And SRD confirmed some classic theories about that flow, right?
It supported the idea that the energy cascade flows predominantly in one direction.
Okay.
From those large scales to smaller scales. Now think about this in the context of genetic algorithms.
Okay.
Could we use SRD to analyze how information flows through a genetic algorithm as it evolves?
That's a fascinating thought. Could we identify which components of the algorithm drive the optimization process and perhaps uncover hidden causalities that we're not accounting for?
Exactly.
It could completely change how we design and understand these algorithms.
Absolutely. And imagine being able to visualize that flow of information as a sort of causality map of the algorithm.
Right.
It would be an incredibly powerful tool for researchers in natural computing.
Before we move on to the turbulent boundary layer, I want to touch on one technical aspect that caught my attention.
Okay.
The assumption of stationarity.
Stationarity. It's a key assumption in many time series analysis techniques, and SRE is no exception. Essentially, it means that the statistical properties of the data remain constant over time.
But in the real world, especially in the dynamic systems we often study in natural computing,
Right.
stationarity is rarely the case.
Right.
How does SUD handle non-stationary data?
That's an important question, and the researchers do address it in the paper.
Okay.
They suggest that for non-stationary data, you might need to segment the time series into shorter chunks where stationarity holds, or you could use techniques to transform the data to make it stationary.
So it's not a deal breaker,
Right.
but something to be mindful of when applying SUB to your own research.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that no tool is perfect, and we always need to be aware of the underlying assumptions.
Exactly. Now let's move on to that second real-world data set, the turbulent boundary layer.
Right, that thin layer of fluid that develops next to a solid surface. It's a crucial concept for understanding things like drag and lift on airplane wings. And I'm curious to see what SUD revealed about it.
They used experimental data from a wind tunnel to examine the interactions between velocity motions in different parts of the boundary layer. Their findings strongly supported a well-established theory called Townsend's outer layer similarity hypothesis,
which states that large-scale motions further from the surface exert a dominant influence on the smaller scales closer to the surface, kind of like a top-down control mechanism.
Precisely. And SOD confirmed this, showing a strong, unique causality flowing from the outer layer to the inner layer.
Okay.
Those large-scale motions were indeed the primary drivers.
But what about causality in the opposite direction?
Yeah.
Did they find any evidence of that?
That's where it gets really interesting. SRD detected absolutely no unique causality flowing from the inner layer to the outer layer. Those small-scale motions weren't influencing the larger scales. It was a one-way street.
Wow, that's a pretty clear-cut result.
It is.
And it highlights the power of SRD to not only identify causal links, but also to rule them out.
Right.
It's not just about finding correlations. It's about discerning true causal relationships.
Think about the implications for fields like aircraft design. If we understand how those large-scale motions are influencing drag and lift, we could potentially design wings that manipulate those motions to reduce fuel consumption.
That's a fantastic example of how a deeper understanding of causality can lead to tangible, real-world benefits.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on, I want to bring up that causality leak again.
Ah, yes, the ever-present reminder of the unknown. What did they find in this boundary layer study?
They discovered a substantial causality leak.
Substantial.
Around 99%, it seems. There's still a lot we don't know about what's influencing those velocity motions.
That's a significant leap.
Right.
It underscores the importance of acknowledging the limitations of our observations. Even with powerful tools like SRD, we're only scratching the surface.
Okay.
It's a humbling realization, but it also opens up exciting avenues for future research.
Indeed, it reminds us that there's always more to discover, more to learn. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in part 2.
We have.
Delving into the mechanics of SRD and exploring its application to various benchmark cases and real-world data sets. But before we wrap up, let's connect all of this back to our audience researchers in the field of natural computing.
That's a great point. Here's the key takeaway. SRD offers a powerful new framework for comprehending complex systems, which are the bread and butter of natural computing.
Right.
Whether you're working with genetic algorithms, swarm intelligence, artificial neural networks, or any system with multiple interacting components, SRD can help you untangle those interactions and potentially unveil hidden causalities.
It's a tool that could lead to more efficient optimization strategies, more robust models, and ultimately a deeper understanding of the systems you're working with. And let's not forget the potential for groundbreaking publications.
Absolutely. This is a new method with proven capabilities. The researchers have even made their code publicly available on GitHub. It's ripe for exploration and application in new and exciting areas.
It sounds like SRD could be a game changer for natural computing researchers who are looking to push the boundaries of their field.
Indeed. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, we have one more fascinating application of SRD to share.
Oh, there's more?
There is. In the final part, we'll explore how the researchers used SRD to tackle something truly groundbreaking.
Okay.
Selecting the most effective input variables for temporal forecasting, it's a whole new level of application. So stay tuned for part 3.
Welcome back to our deep dive on SRD. I don't know about you, but I'm really starting to see the potential of this method, especially for those of us working in natural computing.
It certainly got my attention, and this final segment is where it gets even more intriguing. We're going to explore how the researchers applied SRD to temporal forecasting, using what we know about the past to predict future events.
Now, this is a big deal, right? Being able to predict the future accurately is a game changer in so many fields. And choosing the right input variables for our forecasting models is crucial.
Absolutely. Too many variables can lead to overfitting, where your model is great with the data you trained it on, but falls apart when faced with new data, and with too few variables, you risk missing critical information. It's a delicate balance.
So how does SRD help us walk that tightrope?
Well, they put it to the test on several scenarios, even creating synthetic data sets to really challenge the method. Essentially, they used SRA to analyze the causal relationships between potential input variables and the target variable they wanted to predict.
So the idea is that variables with strong causal links to the target variable would be the most informative for making predictions make sense to me.
Exactly. And their results were promising. By selecting input variables based on their SRD-identified causal strength, they saw improvements in the accuracy of their forecasting models.
Now imagine the possibilities in natural computing. Let's say you're using a genetic algorithm to optimize a complex system, and you have a whole slew of parameters you could tweak. It can be overwhelming, right?
It certainly can be, but with SRE, you could analyze which parameters are most likely to have a real impact on the algorithm's performance. It could help you prioritize your efforts and focus on the tweaks that really matter.
So instead of randomly adjusting parameters and hoping for the best, you could use SRD to guide your optimization strategy in a much more targeted and efficient way.
Precisely. And the applications extend far beyond genetic algorithms. Think about any area of natural computing where you're grappling with complex systems and trying to predict future behavior, financial markets, weather patterns, disease outbreaks. The potential is vast.
It's like having a crystal ball, but one grounded in solid mathematical principles and a deep understanding of causal relationships.
A very apt analogy. SRA could revolutionize how we approach temporal forecasting by helping us identify the most informative input variables. But even with these powerful capabilities, there's a key theme that keeps surfacing: the causality leak.
That mysterious leak representing the influence of those hidden variables, right?
Yeah.
It seems like in almost every study they conducted, they found a significant portion of causality that couldn't be explained by the observed variables.
Yes, and it serves as a powerful reminder that even with advanced tools like SRA, we're still operating with a limited view of the world. There are unseen forces at play shaping our systems in ways we don't fully comprehend.
It's humbling, isn't it, knowing that there's always more to learn, more to uncover. But it's also incredibly exciting. It means there's a whole universe of hidden connections waiting to be discovered.
That's the beauty of research, and I think SRD is a brilliant example of how a new method can not only provide us with powerful tools, but also challenge our assumptions and push us to explore those uncharted territories.
So to wrap things up, is SRD the secret weapon natural computing researchers have been waiting for? It certainly seems like it has the potential to shake things up.
It definitely does. It's a new perspective, a fresh approach to unraveling the complexities of cause and effect. And for those of you eager to dive deeper, we'll include links to the paper, the MIT News article, and even the GitHub repository in the show notes. Go explore, experiment, and see what SRD can unlock in your own research.
And who knows, maybe it'll spark the next wave of groundbreaking publications in natural computing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into SRD. We'll see you next time.